Greetings, brothers and sisters. So, my wife and I started watching The Crown. Multiple people had recommended The Crown, that we watch The Crown, and we resisted it because it was about the royal family, and I thought it was going to be some sort of, glorification of the royal family. It certainly isn't that. It's not truther. It's not a truther. It doesn't have the kind of information that we have in the truther community about the royal family, but it isn't a puff piece to promote the royal family. It's got a lot of stuff in there that's interesting, and it's exceptionally well made. We started watching it because of all the royal family drama that's going on. And last night we watched this. There are a couple of clips. The first one is, self-explanatory, but it's just great. So let's get to that one.
What's better than this in the war?
What do you need? More equipment? There you are. Or masks?
Masks are bloody useless. They're just for show, to make it look like the government's doing something.
So that's really interesting. He said masks don't do anything. It's bloody masks don't do anything. It's just so it makes the government look like they're doing something, right? So this is from 2016, so it was probably filmed in 2015. It's before Trump was even president, to give it some, time reference, just to understand how long ago this was. And, they said this thing that clearly, has implications today. I'll play the clip again in a second. And it was, apparently, whenever this was in the 50s, whenever this was set, Queen Elizabeth was just sworn in as queen, and Winston Churchill was the prime minister. And there was this fog, this toxic, pollution fog. They burned all this coal because they had a cold winter, and the winds were just a certain way, and they had a fog that lasted 4 days where they couldn't see anything. Something like 12,000 people died. Thousands of people died. And so she's in the hospital, and this doctor is talking about what they need, and they're saying mass isn't working. So that was, let's play that again with the
It's science! And you shut up and wear your mask.
What do you need? More equipment? There you are. Or masks?
Masks are bloody useless. They're just for show, to make it look like the government's doing something.
It's science! And you shut up and wear your mask.
What do you need? More equipment? There you are. Or masks?
Masks are bloody useless. They're just for show, to make it look like the government's doing something.
It's science! And you shut up and wear your mask.
What do you need? More equipment? There you are. Or masks?
Masks are bloody useless. They're just for show, to make it look like the government's doing something.
So I actually have quite a bit to get to today, not just this royal stuff. But I thought I'd start off with this, and there's stuff on Cuomo's and Trump's and Hillary Clinton and Alec Baldwin and so many things, links that people have sent me. So it's kind of a big video here. But there was, I think in the following episode, this was really interesting. This was the former king. This is Queen Elizabeth's dad. And he goes to put on the crown, and he looks so ridiculous. Like, look at this crown. Like, look at how ridiculous he looks. Like, look at how childish it is. You put on this stupid crown. Like, just stop it, right? Like, why are you wearing this thing? It doesn't make you royal. The crown doesn't make you royal. The claims about your blood doesn't make you royal. It just, it's not a real thing. It's just a ridiculous thing you put on, right? And then she's, wearing it as well. But, it looks stupid. It's just, it doesn't make you into anything. You are whatever you are. And that's one of the great things I talk about spirituality. I'll come back to this. But it's just, it's not a real thing. So I got more in the royal family, but I want to move on to other things and then come back to this. New news about it. But just keep this in mind, the ridiculousness of wearing a crown. You're like a, child dressing up. It looks stupid. You look stupid, It's just, and the thing's wobbling on his head. It's great. Well, speaking of looking stupid in terms of being dressed up, Andrew Nips Cuomo pulled a Mike Dukakis, and he came out in a blanket with a beer. Blanket, bottle, broken, walls close in on Quo. Dems top Dems say resign. So both the senators from New York and multiple House of Representatives members, including AOC, who I don't think ever liked him because she's, anti-establishment. But what's great about this is Huffington Post that posted this headline, and they're all about him resigning. And so are these, other people that praised him. They all praised him. They made this guy into a hero. That means you were completely wrong, about something where he had more deaths on his watch than anybody else. And then I've showed you some of the clips of people who are praising him. I mean, the New York Post did a compilation video, but you can find so many of them. They were treating him like he was the president. They were saying he was the real president. He was acting presidential while Trump wasn't. And they put this guy up on a pedestal. You can't be that wrong and not, eat some of it, right? Like, you just can't reverse your position this much, claim this guy some sort of savior, and then, then he's completely disgraced, and he's the same guy. You always had these. You can just read people's character and their, who they are on the inside by. I mean, it doesn't take very much. The heartfulness meditation that I do, it's part of what you learn to do, right? You read your own internal condition. You understand other people. You can read their spiritual conditions. You can see them. Of course, I have training in the psychological field. I have a master's in counseling, and I did assessment measures, psychological assessments, and you administer these tests. But essentially, it's something I've always been good at, being introverted and introspective. And of course, you're going to make some mistakes, and people have different sides, right? They're complex. But in terms of the media, they put these people out there, and they say they're heroes when they clearly aren't. And that's what happened with Cuomo's. This is like great. It's platinum. And now, there's just some pictures, right? There's some pictures that, they tell 1,000 words, and that's what's happening here. And so I want to start with these two things. But this is egg on the face of the media. This is about the media and Hollywood and the establishment failing. And, you misread this thing. And now all these media publications and people are turning on Cuomo's, but he was never a good guy, and he did a horrible job with COVID. Like, he had more deaths on his watch than any other place, and he had, it was disaster on his hands there. But because he held these press conferences and had, charts and stuff, right? They're like, oh my God, he's so much better, and all these guys praised him. And now they want him, out. And he's being outed for something where it's just a mirage, right? They don't want to focus on the COVID aspect, so they're getting rid of him because, he did such a disastrous job. So let's go back to the royal family stuff. I just remember there's a couple more scenes from The Crown that were very telling that have to do with what's going on here. Prince William says, monarchy not racist, but look who carried him on the throne in 2012. And so he was in Africa, and he had a African throne, and these guys dressed in Aboriginal type of outfits carrying him. He's got a big smile. And so is there anything more racist than that? Like, just look at that. Like, that is just the epitome of racism. And I'll talk about what it means. Here's the photo here. I'll talk about, what really is behind this. The attitude behind this is very important. Why he thinks this is a good thing, right? This is why the royal family thinks that they are, to be placed on a throne. There is his wife as well being carried, and I guess she's being carried by women here, and the same sort of thing. So it says here, the pictures show him and Kate Middleton being carried on thrones back in 2012 by people of color in Solomon Islands. And this was the Diamond Jubilee tour of the British Commonwealth nations of the Pacific Ocean, South Pacific at the time. Solomon Islands are here by Papua New Guinea. So again, these are formerly conquered places that have agreed to be part of the British Commonwealth. Here's Australia. And so Britain had conquered all these places, and these countries are still a part of the British Empire. And so these are tropical islands, they're vacation paradises, and they were being carried on these thrones. So I first came across the Crown Chronicles. And so what this is actually covering in the Crown, I'm going to show you some clips of that she is about to have her coronation. It says here, scene of the two most authentic monarchical symbols, the orb and the scepter, are used at the coronation of each new sovereign, full of symbolism and power. But why are they used and what do they mean? There's the orb and there's the scepter. The sovereign's orb, as part of the crown jewels is officially named, is a symbol of godly power. A cross above a globe, it represents Christ's dominion over the world, as the monarch is God's representative on earth. And so their thought is that she is, the queen or the king or whoever is in this position, is God's representative on earth. Think about that, the chosen one. And I want to show you these clips, but first, this has, look at LeBron James, the chosen one, when he was called the chosen one, was coming out of high school, and he got a chosen one tattoo on his back. This idea of being a chosen one, anointed by God, blessed by God, to be a king or a queen. They call him King James, right? That's his nickname, right? Dr. J, King James, that's the equivalent. And so you have this idea that's being perpetrated out into the world where people want to be kings and queens, of course, Beyonce being called Queen Bee. And so you have so many people want to be known as a queen or a king. They think of themselves as royal, and this is where that comes from. And it's really a bad idea because it's the opposite of what they say it is. So let's go to these clips from the Crown show about this.
Where they described this fog as an act of God. You said, because the calling comes from the highest source, from God himself.
Yes.
So the younger woman here is Queen Elizabeth. The current is supposed to be Queen Elizabeth, the current queen. And that is her grandmother, who was a former queen who was married to a king and was a mother to a king and now a grandmother to the future queen. And she's explaining that they believe that their right to rule comes from God. They have been divinely anointed.
Monarchy is God's sacred mission to grace and dignify the earth, to give ordinary people an ideal to strive towards, an example of nobility and duty to raise them in their wretched lives.
That is a huge statement. What she's saying here is that these kings and queens, the royal blood, the royal people, but specifically the king or the queen, but all of them, are placed here as an example by God to give the lower people who aren't as evolved inspiration and an example of what it is to be divine, what it is to be sent by God to rise to higher levels of evolution. And so that is a huge statement because that is not just about the royal family. This is about celebrity and now politicians, this class of people around the globe. Of course, the queen is going to be considered the highest by these people, right? The queen or the king is going to be considered the highest of these people. But all of these people that have so-called nobility of character, nobility of privilege, are, ordained by God as an example to the lower people, as, something for them to strive for, right? Think about what you just said here.
Monarchy is a calling from God. That is why you're crowned in an abbey, not a government building. Why you're anointed, not appointed. It's an archbishop that puts the crown on your head, not a minister or public servant. Which means that you're answerable to God in your duty, not the public.
Again, another huge statement, which is backed by, which we now know, this orb that represents being a divine sovereign, right? The sovereign's orb that represents that she's God's representative on earth. This is what they believe, the royal family, that they're ordained by God and by blood and by, breeding and all these things, that they're royal people. And so this episode was called An Act of God. It was the episode about the fog, but also about, the act of God creating a sovereign. And then the following episode, which I showed you, the former king, Queen Elizabeth's father, is talking to her about the swearing in ceremony, which is also very telling.
You have to anoint me. Otherwise, I can't be king.
So this was a king with a stutter, you remember if you saw that movie, The King's Speech. And so this is Queen Elizabeth's father. She's pretending to be an archbishop, and she's reading the script of what's going to happen for his being sworn in terms of his coronation. And he's talking about the anointing being the most important part.
When the holy oil touches me, I am transformed, brought into direct contact with the divine.
So there it is, right? This is their belief system, the centerpiece to their belief system.
Forever changed, bound to God. It is the most important part of the entire ceremony.
So you understand this. This has been, it's historically spoken about. It's represented here in a, fictional tale that isn't all that fictional, right? That's based in their reality. And what they believe, the monarchists, the British monarchists, and many royal people all over the world, the people who believe in royalty, think that this comes from God. They think that their rule, they think that everything that they represent happens, like he's saying he's being anointed by an archbishop with holy oil, and when he's anointed, God comes in him. God merges with him through this anointing process, this ritualistic anointing process. Then he's filled with God, and he's now God's representative on earth. And that's what the British Empire and the royal succession and the royal blood and all these things represented, that they're chosen. They're chosen by divinity to rule over this world, and through this ceremony, they're given this sovereign right to be the, God's representative. And so what's important here is whether that's true or not. And it's not true, right? If it was true, it'd be one thing. But if it's not true, then it's the opposite. Now they're demonic. And the reason they're demonic is they're claiming something. They're claiming a divine right. And there's lots of demonic aspects to religion as well. Because when a person claims divinity when they're not, that's demonic. When they claim a divine position when they haven't been given it by God, then that's being demonic or even devilish. You understand this? Because it's their ego claiming something. It's their ego manifestation, and they might be in contact with some sort of, demon or negative entities that they think is God communicating with them. I mean, there's all kinds of negative possibilities here. But there's only one positive possibility, and that's true, where God gives you a position, whatever it might be, gives you a job, and you do that job based in your devotion to God. And you're always being humbled. You're always checking in with God, and God's always telling you what, God is molding you and telling you what to be like and to change and giving you answers you don't want to hear. I mean, this is part of being a spiritual person. Whatever role that you play, when you do it for God, when you do it sincerely for God, some people are and some people aren't, right? Some people claim they're working for God and they're not really, right? And you always have to be, questioning yourself. You always have to be going deeper, and you always have to, in some way or another, be, open to some of this is ego manifestation. Like I experience this all the time. You have to look at what you're doing and not just have this complete confidence that it's all coming from God. You always have to check yourself a little bit. And the royal family, the sovereign royal family, is so far beyond that, right? Checking themselves because of the empire and what they've done across the globe. Some of that God wanted to happen. I've said that before. God wanted the peoples of the world to be connected. God wanted a global situation instead of all these localized governments and people. God wanted a globalized connection, a global economy, but not the one we have, right? The one that we have now, the global debt-based economy, maybe was necessary to facilitate this connection that we now have, a global connection. But it certainly isn't divine. It is a debt-based economy. And the New World Order and all these things that have been rolled out, it's about the power of man and the power of ego. Our world religions are all about the power of man and the power of ego, and not about submitting to a higher authority. The king and the queens clearly don't submit to a higher authority. The other piece to this was he was talking about being anointed by the divine oil. Now, there is a situation out there, and I know this from the heartfulness system, because of the transmission given in the heartfulness system, this divine energy that is passing through the master of the system who is merged with God and is sharing this energy with the people who meditate and do the heartfulness system for free. There's no political aspirations. There's no power system here. And so this transmission flows, right? I've talked about this. Some of you have tried the heartfulness system and felt the transmission, but it either flows or it doesn't. It either is or it isn't, right? Because there's other organizations that claim that they have divine energy in them. I mean, all religious organizations claim divine energy. This anointing with oil is a similar claim. Is the oil that anoints the king in what he's talking about here? It's the same oil that's going to anoint Elizabeth. They're building up to this in the first season of this show. And so I'm interested to see how this plays out. Very compelling show. I mean, well done. And so is this oil charged with divine energy? Because the transmission that's given in the heartfulness system is, there's similar, there's been saints in the past that were able to charge things. Like if you think about holy water in the Catholic tradition, in terms of, various higher developed souls that were able to put spiritual energy into food, into water, into a church or a temple or, even an idol or something like that. The original idols were charged with spiritual energy, with subtle godly love. You could feel God's love in the object or whatever it might be, right? A person. And so you would feel what it was like to be with God, similar to the transmission, not as good because the transmission comes direct, right, from the source into your heart. It's something unique, but it's similar, right? This is how religions were helping people feel God's presence. Primitive people, militaristic people, barbarian, type of people, right? Not evolved people feel God's love through, a charged idol that had a sword and looked powerful, and the barbarians would go and worship it and pray for victory, and they would receive some of these subtle vibrations, loving vibrations. It was working on helping their hearts evolve in future existences so they would become more refined and more spiritual. And so this oil could be charged with spiritual energy. And the reason I know it's not, because of what the British Empire has done in terms of hoarding land, 6.6 billion acres of land, in terms of the suffering that they've caused, in terms of all the non-godly things that they've done, right? The British Empire and the king are not anointed by God. The oil does not have any charge in it. It experienced holy water and communion in the Catholic tradition. They have this water that's there that everyone's putting their hands in. It's like a bacteria fest. And then you get this little wafer. It tastes like cardboard. That's supposed to be the body of Christ. And I, went to church and I felt some spiritual energy in churches and praying in churches and had some spiritual experiences. My parents used to have prayer meetings. So there was some, godly energy there that benefited me and, would help me later on. When I was 14, I started drinking, using drugs. But when I was 13, I used to go to these prayer meetings. My mom would have these various people, nuns and people over her house. And there was energy. And my dad too, but not really. Like he was just there, My mom was a real devotional person. And it benefited me. My mom and my grandmother said the rosary for me and my brother and my family. both of us, my brother and I, found the heartfulness system later on. And I attribute some of that, some of what's happened to me later in life to the prayers I received from my grandmother and my mom. They didn't, my mom ended up doing the heartfulness system. I've talked about that in the past. But in terms of whether something is charged or not, you can feel it, right? You can feel God's love. And the transmission that's available in the heartfulness system is, the experiences that I have. Like, I'm talking from memory right now in terms of going to ashrams and getting sittings. I can feel it in my heart, but not as good as when I'm there. Like, I've had these sittings over and over again where this divine energy descends or goes into your heart on an etheric level. And it's just an amazing experience. Like, I've had amazing experiences of, being touched by God, by connecting with God, communing with God through the transmission and the ashrams that are available in the heartfulness system. And I can feel it right now. I can feel in my heart. I can feel like some of the, like loving energy just talking about it. But it's not as good as when I'm there, like at a spiritual gathering. And they're not, they're always, some of them are cleaning and they're very intense and, you might feel restless and things. And so it's not like some blissed out thing all the time or something like this. But I've had some, revelations, and I'll wake up in the middle of the night and, I can feel the energy like flowing through me as I talk here. But there's these deep levels, and when you feel it, it is something unique, right? When you're truly blessed by God, when God's grace descends on you, and you're going to have these moments. And what's great about the heartfulness system is you have these moments over and over and over again, where in past spiritual movements, you'd have them once. And it's, humbling. And then once you have that experience, now, it's your duty to connect to God and allow God to instruct you in one way or another. And there's, like I said, humility is a big part of it. And there's nothing humble about putting on one of these stupid crowns and holding one of these orbs and, scepters and, all the pomp and circumstances in these monstrous castles and, with all these resources, holding on to all these resources and thinking that you're an example of evolution, of being a spiritual person. And, the dog is licking my face right now. So my puppy's in. Tulsi goes right for the mouth. She tries to get her tongue in there and whatever, your ears or whatever. And then, anyway, so that you're some sort of an example of human evolution because of being a king. Like, that's a hierarchy, being a celebrity. And this is, again, a part of our culture. It's very important because it's also Hollywood celebrities and divas and big egos and singers and politicians and, athletes, and that they somehow made it to a higher level and they're an example and they're chosen by God based in either their talent or their success or whatever, ordained to be examples. And people think about that like it's some sort of evolution, and it's clearly not. Being a saint is the exact opposite. It's not about building your ego and feeling good about yourself. In fact, your ego is constantly getting dinged up. Like, you're always getting, you're always getting humbled. You're always getting, whatever, right? You're being reduced to understanding that your ego is always going to want to grow and be inflated, and that true spiritual sovereignty, true spiritual leadership is to be, somebody who listens to God and be in a conduit and allow God's energy to flow through you. This is what the heartfulness system is all about, that you get out of the way so God can come through you. You reduce your ego, you suppress your ego and allow God to flow through you in whatever way possible. So I got a bunch more stuff to get to, but look at the, there's various sayings, some sayings I could think of off the top of my head, but born to rule, they have born to rule. In every society, some men are born to rule and some to advise. And so it's the same. People get this tattooed on them, right? Born to rule. And then there's things like, I'm the king. These are popular sayings. I am the queen. Also, very popular saying, apparently. And then there's all these sayings about being royal sayings, things to do with Crown Royal liquor. And so, it's part of our language. There's all these sayings, be loyal to the royal within you, all these things, right? People want to be considered royal, that people like to think that they're royal in some way, and not understanding that it's actually, it is flying in the face of what you truly are, right? In terms of being a spiritual being, it's much better to become a saint than it is to become a king or a queen. So one of my viewers sent me this. This is Hillary Clinton's, Instagram page, her official Instagram page, and she had Alec Baldwin on, and says, which is worse, debating Donald Trump on stage or playing him on TV for 4 years? Alec Baldwin and I tackled these questions and more in this week's episode of You and Me Both. Also, starring Conversations I Love with Kerry Washington and Full Frontal Sam B. It's a packed lineup.
What I thought was there's people who you'll never change their mind. There's people who you don't ever need to change their mind. And that group in the middle, we thought if we kept doing it, 1 year goes by, 2 years goes by, and they go, well, I thought he would change and adapt and become better at the job. And what we reminded them of was he's not changing. He's not growing. Every human being, as you know better than I'll ever know, every man thus far who's in that job, what a journey of growth.
Exactly.
So when he came along and we kept giving it to him, it was to remind people that he isn't changing. There's a benefit of the doubt we gave him, and he's already gone past the statute of limitations on that.
And so what's interesting about this, what they're saying here, what Alec is saying here about Trump's, the biggest problem that people had with Trump, for the most part, in terms of the establishment, other politicians, Republicans certainly, and people in the media, is he didn't act presidential. And that's what Alec Baldwin is referring to, because their idea of growth was that he would step into the role and play this part. Alec, being an actor, would appreciate this, that Trump never stepped into the presidential role. Like, he just didn't do it. He didn't play the part. And he did things that were unpresidential. And that was, more than any other thing, why people disliked him. There was, things that he said that were offensive, and there were things that he did and said that made people upset, and there was, a whole list of things that people complained about. But their number one, especially the establishment people, is that he didn't act royal, right? He didn't act presidential. He didn't play the part. He didn't become a brand. He was more genuine. He tweeted in the middle of the night, and he did things and said things that were immature that other presidents wouldn't be allowed to say. He didn't listen to his handlers the same way. And so that was ultimately why they felt like they needed to take him down. Because if you look at Joe Biden and Trump, they're basically very similar in their flaws, in things that people criticize them about. They're older white men who have, very similar attitudes and, ways of expressing themselves, even though the Democrats and Republicans would never admit to this. But if you look at them, they're similar. Like, they have a little bit different personality types, but the things that they get accused of are things that both of them share. But the difference is Joe Biden is a career politician, and he believes in the status quo, and he is acting presidential. He is at least attempting to act presidential, even with all of his snafus and gaffes and things. And so their big problem here, going back to this idea of royalty, is that Trump didn't play the part. He didn't play the role. And, think about that. Like, think about how, because Trump was more himself, more sincere, more authentic than any other candidate that I've ever seen. He's a liar and a flim-flam man. He has these various qualities. But he was, he wasn't playing the part in the same way that past politicians do, where they just act in a branded way. They have this brand and they stick with the brand and they stay on brand and they live by the polls and all these things, where Trump did a lot of winging. In fact, Trump wasn't good at reading the teleprompter. He was actually pretty bad at it. But he was good at just going out and speaking, and that drove these guys nuts. Like, it just, all of them. They want somebody who plays the part. And so then there was this. These things came out on the same day, a couple days ago. John Dean warns Trump that prosecutors are closing in. It's only a matter of days. The Watergate figure reveals a key sign the former president is in deep, that they want to really go after this guy and prosecute him, which is completely different than the way they handled Hillary, because there were things that Hillary did that were certainly criminal, right? And, there are things Barack Obama did even in terms of these illegal wars, and George W. Bush. I mean, all of them. These wars that they were war crimes, right? They were illegal wars. The ones in Afghanistan and Iraq, and certainly the one in Libya more than any other one. There was zero reason to go to war with Libya. There was this claim that Gaddafi was abusing his people, and that was completely false. If you remember, I've done videos on this. He had like 70% approval rating, and when he took over in a bloodless coup, he inherited the poorest country in Africa. Now it's the wealthiest country in Africa. And so there was no reason for the UN and these countries to go in, because he wasn't threatening anybody. He had gotten rid of his weapons of mass destruction. He wasn't doing anything. Like, it came out of nowhere. All of a sudden, they were like, oh, we gotta go invade Libya. We gotta destroy Libyan government and do regime change because Gaddafi's torturing his people. And there's rulers all over the world that are torturing their people, right? I mean, droning innocent people, which Obama was the worst at. And, nobody said anything about that. But all of a sudden we had to go into Libya. It made no sense, right? And Hillary Clinton was a huge part of that. And, Trump didn't engage in any of those things. And he's the one that they're going after, and they're trying to prosecute him. I mean, he's the guy they're really going after when you had all these horrible leaders that did what could only be considered war crimes. And so, think about that, because it's a part of this whole royal behavior, right? Nobility of character, that Trump doesn't display. Harry and William will attend Diana Memorial together despite tensions. That's happening. Queen Elizabeth cracks jokes in first appearance since royal race scandal allegations.
Morning.
Oh, good morning, Your Majesty.
Think about her calling the Queen Your Majesty. It's just, Your Majesty in Wiktionary, a title of respect used when addressing a monarch of higher rank than a prince, that is a king, queen, emperor, or empress. Informal sarcastic, a sarcastic term of address to anyone who is acting pompous or bossy. Take it easy, Your Majesty. But imagine calling someone Your Majesty, in the higher rank, right? The higher rank. They're ranked higher than you. This is some idea of a military, like the whole British, all the people are subjects, and they're all part of a military rule. And, as well as the divinity aspect of this, the fake divinity aspect, where they're in this hierarchical type of situation where people in the royal family and the queen or the king are at the top of the rank, right? They're ranked above all of you. And the way that you signify this is calling them Your Majesty.
And it's wonderful to be with you celebrating this year's British Science Week. So it was actually my birthday yesterday on the 9th of March. But Yuri Gagarin, the first human to travel out into space, was also born on the 9th of March. And I believe, ma'am, that you met him.
Wow, way to bring in the heat. Like, with all the things that are going on, they're talking about her meeting the first man into space, allegedly.
Can you tell us about that?
I did indeed, yes. It was very interesting to meet him.
What was he like?
Russian.
Kaboom! She's bringing the jokes.
Speak English.
I didn't speak English.
No, he was fascinating. And I suppose being the first one, it was particularly fascinating.
Yes. He's been quite an inspiration for me.
Look at how they're all just fawning all over this. She's just a normal woman. She's not royal. She doesn't have royal blood. She doesn't have, she's been trained in etiquette and, educated in whatever royal behaviors, but, she didn't do anything great. Like, she owns 6.6 billion acres of land, which easily could be distributed in a way that would alleviate so much suffering of so many people around the globe, and she has all these resources, and it's just deceptive. I mean, everything you think about, like this idea of the divine blood of royal people, it's fundamentally wrong. It's beyond racist, right? It represents that they think that there's this genetic hierarchy, and people with the proper genetics are born to rule and born to be, above other people. And it's just messed up. Like, it's something that is a plague on the human race right now.
Me, getting into space science, I also think it must have been very terrifying to be the first one and not knowing what's really going to happen.
Yes, could you come back again?
Yes, because I think in those days,
Very important.
it's one thing going, but coming.
Wow. And so they're just really excited to be talking to the Queen. So there was this idea. There was an idea that came out of who knows what or where, that establishment, people who establish themselves as rulers, usually by being thugs, right? Robber baron kings, by force, by brute force. And they became rulers. They became in charge of subjects who were more or less their slaves in one way or another. And so as they began to justify this, right? As they began to justify the abuse of other people, they came up with this idea that they were divinely born, that they were special in some way. And that's why they deserved more. They deserved more land. They deserved more of everything, right? They deserved the best of everything. Privileges that other people didn't have. People were supposed to carry them and give them stuff, give them money, pay them taxes, all these things, because they were God's representative on earth. And it isn't just the British royal family, but that's the power structure that exists now. Because America is just an extension of Britain, right? We speak English, we speak English, and we have all of these, all of our history is tied to Britain in one way or another. And so this is a part of that, right? And so these royal families, these people, specifically the royal family in Britain, but all across the globe, have this mentality. And Britain had this empire. I mean, it was called the British Empire, and it still exists in just a different form, and America is part of it. And America is the military wing of this empire. And it's not just this group, it's not just the royals, but there's lots of groups that think they're superior in one way or another. They think they have superior genetics, or they're some way better than normal people, like the Muggles, right? It's the wizards versus the Muggles. And so there's these lower people that can only be inspired to become famous and rich in Hollywood or politics or academia. The people that rise up and have talents and are somehow, there's people who are just a little bit smarter or more gifted in one way or another, have a little bit more ambition. They have something that sets them apart from everybody else, and they achieve success. And those people are trained, all of us are trained to look at them as being better in some way. And they are supposed to look at themselves as being better to justify their lifestyle and their privileges. And, there's people who are, obviously more gifted and more evolved than other people that rise up and can be considered the cream of the crop, and maybe they deserve a little bit more and, special treatment, at least less physical work or whatever it is. Brilliant people, leaders, they can focus on their leadership. Sure, I believe that that's a little bit true, but not this much true. Like, not where you're worshiping people are being called your majesty, where they're thinking they're somehow the only people that are representing God. Because in truth, all of us have God in us, and we're representing God here if we choose to do so. It's not what we want. That doesn't give us some carte blanche, manifest destiny to do whatever we want, whenever we want. It means that we have to do more and serve more. And the best way is to help people to connect to God. Like, that to me is evolution, the way I understand it, right? There are people who, their souls, you have a spiritual approach. Everybody has everyone's soul is on a similar spiritual path. At least the spiritual path is the same in the sense that on an etheric level, you have a proximity to God. And so you go through these various stages like anything else. It's not a race, right? It's not a competition, but you are going on this journey back to the source, back to reunite with God, back to your creator. And your soul, wherever it is, right, wherever it is in terms of this journey, is, when you incarnate as a human being, you're going to come down with a certain level of connectivity to God. If you're somebody who's been around on planet Earth, had multiple incarnations in these, various lives, and you're going to tell those types of people, you're going to be able to see they have had experience before. Some of them might come with business experience or knowledge and things. It's like playing a video game. The first life is probably your shortest life, right? If you're playing a video game, you're going to die pretty quickly with your first attempt, and you're a newbie. And so there's a lot of newbie souls. We have so much of a population. We have souls that are moving up from the, animal experience, from some, they were an animal in a previous existence or something. The transmigration of the soul. So you have people who are more evolved in one way or another, more intelligent. They're going to have various ways of expressing some of their past accomplishments and achievements in this field. And the best one, most important one, is spiritual accomplishment, where their soul is moved closer to God and they have a higher spiritual approach. But that doesn't mean they get to have, royal. They get to have these liberties and privileges on the material plane. It means that they have more to offer and help move humanity higher up in their spiritual journey, help other people achieve what they've achieved, especially if they've reached the goal itself. And that's what the heartfulness system and the transmission and cleaning, these services that are offered freely, cleaning the hearts of people and transmitting to them, so their soul gets, a sort of a boost in its spiritual journey, right? So it's about service. And I wanted to say this thing I was saying earlier about gatherings and transmission. I remember it, right? I remember going to gatherings. I remember these experiences. But oftentimes, sometimes I'll be sick traveling to India, or something will be going on, and, I won't be feeling great, and I won't be necessarily doubtful, but I'll be a little bit annoyed and like, why am I doing this? And then I'll get to the ashram and it'll be like just this blissful, just this loving, saturated with God's love. And I'm like, wow, this is incredible. Or I'll go into meditation. I'll have one great meditation or after the gathering. It'll happen somewhere along the way. Usually when I walk into the ashram or I go and I'm around the master of the system, and you can feel the energy coming off of him and, the spiritual condition that he has. And it's just something, it's almost like when you're in the moment and you experience it, when you experience God or divinity, for that moment, you'll have a memory of it, and you'll be able to maybe recreate the feeling when you think about it, and your heart might well up. When you've been moved emotionally, you might experience this in your life, especially on a heart level. You can recreate that, or you'll be able to, keep that condition, allow it to linger and just stay with you internally for some period of time. But, it's something like if I'm away from it from a little bit, I forget how great it is. It's one of these things. And that's the way it should be. It should be, leave your heart feeling full of love. And when you're with somebody that you love and you miss them, sometimes you don't appreciate it as much when they're with you, but then you don't see them for a day or two or a week, or they get sick and you're worried about losing them or something, and the love grows even stronger. Separation makes you experience the love, the craving, because that's another thing that happens with the heartfulness system, that after a while you'll start craving to be, at a gathering, or, having one of these sittings or something. It's like you'll need your heart's craving to experience that love. And that's the way it should be, not, where you have people who are just takers. The royal family is just taking and exploiting all of their subjects and having this opulent lifestyle and engaging in these sort of deviant behaviors because they think they're anointed by God. It's really, messed up on every possible level. Only spirituality will save this world. It's Paul Romano, definitely pointing from the Apocalypse and the Ascension. Everyone have a blessed day and be grateful.